So now I read chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Debt the First 5,000 Years. And I have to say, so far, the book is now starting to repeat itself quite a bit. And a lot of these chapters that I'm about to mention kind of overlap really hard with one another. So I'm just going to instead try and stick to some of the core ideas that he provided. So in one of these chapters, he talks about the notions of economics that the moral notions of economics, like modern economics, are kind of wrong and not appropriate to characterize modern societies. And he says these notions are self-interest and reciprocity, that human societies don't work like this. He argues for these other three moral principles, and one is each according to their own ability and each according to their own need. And he calls this communism. He accepts that is a contentious notion of communism, and probably most people wouldn't accept that. I don't think I would accept that. But he calls that like a kind of principle of communism. He has another one that's called hierarchy, but it works by precedent, not reciprocity. So if your father was a king, you become a king. Doesn't matter if you help the king or not. It's the precedent of the bloodline is what's going to continue forward. And then he says things tend to trend towards exchanges of equal value. That's another moral principle that he believes we have. But he also argues that it should never actually reach equal value because exchanges also involve debts, and debt was a political tool, as he said in the first 4 chapters. Which transitions us into these other 2 chapters pretty nicely. So he says on the one hand that the level of honor somebody had was a measure of their credit worthiness, and that being in debt was actually a dishonorable thing. So you didn't want to be in debt. And on top of that, he says that debt was very much used as a political tool. And he cites examples where Roman figures or senators would try to put others in debt and then point to them in public and say, look, this person's in debt. And then on top of that, he's not honoring his debts. They would use it as a political tool to get advantage of one another. And so he gives this more kind of social history of debt in these 2 chapters. It's chapter 6 and 7, which, to be honest, yes, I agree with. Debt was obviously used as a tool, but I feel like he focuses too much on the social sides of debt, which I think he is coming from an anthropological worldview, so it makes sense. But there are a lot of other things that debt does besides being a social element, especially when it comes to formalized institutions. Giving out debt, formalized institutions don't care about tarnishing your reputation unless you're somebody important, which he seems to be ignoring a lot in this book. He doesn't seem to look at debt as debt being given from institutions. He just seems to be looking at debt given from individuals. Now, another thing that he points out in chapter 8, which I thought was pretty interesting, and this is the kind of stuff that I find is the strength of the book, is he talks about how there's cycles inside history of credit and cash, or I think he calls it credit and bullion. And the reason why these cycles occur, he argues, is because of war and peace. So whenever there's high amounts of war, lending out credit historically would not be good because probably the people you're giving credit to are going to be soldiers who are armed to the teeth. And that is, he says, the definition of a credit risk, which I couldn't agree more with. And then when there's times of a lot of cash or peace, there's a very large incentive for people to gather arms, go raid, and steal that wealth, right? So that would then lead to a time of credit because after the raiding, what happened? After you steal their wealth, there's no more wealth to steal. And now what is there? There's wealth to loan out. And so now you're becoming a creditor, right? You're loaning out your wealth. And so he argues that there is this history of credit and bullion inside societies. The shortcoming of this argument, though, is that he doesn't actually do any quantitative history. He doesn't look at bullion supply to credit supply at times of war and peace, say in like the British Empire, or even during the Norman conquest of the United Kingdom, or even in China. He does, in these next 3 chapters, dive a little bit into different periods of credit and different periods of bullion, but I feel like he doesn't do the kind of analysis that you would need to prove the point he's trying to make. So there's a little bit of a shortcoming there. So I'm going to read chapters, I think, 9, 10, 11, and 12 next. And then after that, I'll probably give a full review of the book. But with that being said, let me know what you think below, and bye-bye for now.